Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones. But the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed.
Good morning again. If you have your Bibles, would you please take them and open them to the book of 1 Samuel. If you have a device, it should be easy to find. If you're not familiar with the Bible and you have a hard copy, it's kind of towards the left-hand side of the middle of your Bible. How's that for confusing the issue? 1 Samuel. But while you're turning there, I want to draw your attention. You're going to have to multitask here, but go to the end of the notes that are provided for you in the bulletin, because what we've talked about this summer as we go through the book of 1 Samuel is that we want to be able to offer opportunities for you to grow in that knowledge. I hope that whatever you know about the Bible is not just acquired here in these 45 minutes on Sunday morning, but rather that you are in the Word continually. And the more that you are in the Word, the more you're going to find out you love it. The more you're going to find out how it applies to your life. And it takes some effort on your part. But I really want to challenge you to read your Bibles every day this summer. And if you can, fit in a reading of 1 Samuel. It's a great story. But I'd like you to do this. First of all, you just read the next time we're going to be in 1 Samuel, because of other events going on, will be July 8th. And Pastor John will be giving that sermon. And so on July 8th, by July 8th, if you go ahead and read 1 Samuel 4 through 7, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times, it will take you 10 minutes to each time. And I'm a slow reader. I don't know of anybody that's slower than me at reading. I'm very slow. And so it takes about 10 minutes to read that many chapters. And I know that it's a great read. If you're new to the Bible and you've heard of David and maybe Saul and but now the story, it's going to get real. It's amazing, and it moves very, very quickly. You'll love the story of Saul and David and Samuel and everybody else. But then also, train yourself to notice gospel connections. We talked about this last week, that the Bible has a grand story. And I think that sometimes we tend to think that the story in the Old Testament is disconnected to what's going on in the New Testament. That there's creation, there's the flood, there's the Exodus, there's the Jews, Jesus. And there's no connection. There's tons of connections. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this in the summertime, is just going through the Bible, book by book, applying gospel connections. Well, you look for those. I think that you'll find them. Sometimes you kind of have to wonder about it, and it'll hit you about 2 a.m. in the morning. And sometimes it's just slapping you right in the face. It's right there. And you see it. You see it for all of its beauty. So just train yourself to begin to look for gospel connections in what you are reading. And we're going to do that today as we look at the first 2 chapters of 1 Samuel. And I hope that you're benefited by this. I'm excited to get into this book, and I'm excited to get into the familiar stories. But I'm even more excited about today, because today we are going to talk about greatness. And as I read through the story of this incredible woman named Hannah, I just kept finding the word greatness. This is a great woman. This is an amazing woman. This is a beautiful woman. This is amazing. And I just kept finding myself wandering towards that word greatness because she is truly that. And we Americans, we know about greatness. We apply greatness to all kinds of things. If someone has wealth, we call it not just wealth, but great wealth. And all that means is that they are free to do a lot of things with their money that other people who don't have that much can't do. That's what greatness is. It's freedom. You see a really great athlete. A lot of people, myself included, say that Steph Curry is a great basketball player. Why? What makes him great? Well, what makes him great is that he can do anything he wants with the basketball on the basketball court. At least it seems that way. He looks very, very free as he applies his skill of basketball. I think of the musicians that we have up here, and I look at them and I see how they play, the drums, the guitar, the keyboard, in the early service, brass, woodwind, all these different kinds of instruments, and I see great musicians, and it looks as if they can do anything they want with those instruments. They're great. They're free. I think that we're going to find out in Hannah is that this is a great woman. In fact, I'm going to go on a limb and say this, and I'll wrestle you for it afterwards, but I believe that Hannah is the greatest figure in the book of Samuel. She's amazing. And right now you're thinking, we know, Craig, if you just shut up, we can get to the story. We can find out how amazing she is, right? Well, we're going to find out. And so what I'm going to do, this is kind of self-disclosure here. I'm going to do something that I have never done as your pastor here in these last 8 years. And I've probably done maybe 3 or 4 times in the 30 years I've been a preacher. And I'm going to do a how-to sermon. I have this aversion to how-to sermons because all they do is redefine failure. If I were to give you 5 keys to be successful or 6 ways to be happy, then if you're convinced, you're going to go out and try and you're going to fail. And so I've just redefined failure for you. I haven't done anything. It draws crowds, but it doesn't do anything to the crowd once they leave. Well, today, how to be great. How to be steps to become great. And all the TV preachers get weepy when they hear me do that, right? Steps to become great. We're going to do that today. 3 steps I want to talk to you about, and all 3 of these steps are connected to this great woman, Hannah. And I believe that the greatness that she is displaying is available to you and me. All right? Now, if I was selling a product, you'd want to buy it, wouldn't you? Right? Well, I want you to. I want you to buy into this. I want you to enjoy what Hannah has for us. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I think it's important to know. 1 Samuel in the Hebrew Bible follows directly after Judges. In our English Bibles, Ruth is tucked in between the 2 books. Now, it's a story about the time of Judges, but so is 1 Samuel. In fact, flip back, if you would please, to the very last chapter of Judges, chapter 21, and look at verse 25. It's a verse we looked at last Sunday. This actually occurs 3 or 4 times in the book of Judges, and so it's very repetitive. Verse 25 of verse 21, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And then if you want to put your own words in there, and you can say, and that's not a good thing. You have 2 people in a room who are doing what is right in their own eyes, there's going to be conflict. You do that with an entire nation, and there's going to be problems. Well, that's the setting of 1 Samuel. That's what's happening during the time that our story begins in chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. And in fact, we come now to the first step to becoming great. Number 1, own your helplessness. That's not exactly a way to become great, is it? It is God's way. Own your helplessness. In fact, I would say this. I think that one of the first primary things that a new Christian must learn, if they are to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, is to embrace their own helplessness. That is so un-American. We pride ourselves in having options. We pride ourselves in having choices. And we're very free about those choices. And as long as we have those options, as long as we have those choices, then we're not helpless. I think of a couple times Jesus in John chapter 15, he just flat out says it. He doesn't, unflinchingly says, without me, You can do nothing. In other words, without me, you are completely and absolutely helpless. Another time in Matthew 19, Jesus is talking to disciples and talking about how difficult it is to get into heaven. And he kind of unpacks what that looks like, and his disciples say, Master, if this is true, then who can be saved? In other words, they're saying no one can be saved. If this is the parameter for getting in, no one is going to get in. And that's where Jesus makes that very famous statement in Matthew 19. With man it's impossible, but with God nothing is impossible. I think it's very important that we own our helplessness, that we understand what that helplessness looked like, and we can learn this from Hannah. Look at verse 2. In verse 1, we're learned about a guy by the name of Elkanah, and he has 2 wives. Verse 2, the name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Right there, we get the plot line. Why did they tell us this? Because it's going to matter. It's going to matter that Peninnah had children, Hannah had none. Verse 3, now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons, Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. The tabernacle that we learned about in the Exodus, that was in Shiloh for circumstances that we may talk about this summer. But it's there. In fact, Beth found kind of a picture of a scaled version of what the tabernacle may have looked like. And by the way, the setting of Shiloh is very similar to this, minus the paved cul-de-sac right there. But this is kind of a scale model of what the tabernacle looked like in Shiloh. And Elkanah, Hannah, and Peninnah and their family would go there once a year to offer sacrifices and do what obedient Hebrews were supposed to do at that time. They were going up for that. Verse 4, on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. So it was an act of worship that when you offered an animal, you were allowed to have certain parts of the animal to eat. And that's how you would furnish your trip, okay? But to Hannah, verse 5, he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. All right, so now all we know is Elkanah's in a heap of trouble. Because he's getting children from one wife, but he doesn't love her. He loves the other one. He loves the other wife who has no children. Well, how's it going with the 2 wives? We find out in verse 6, and her rival. Right there. That word rival. Now we know. Now we know how the 2 are getting along. It's not like they're teaming up against Elkanah. It's rather that they are at odds with each other. Well, why? Well, we can figure out why, right? Verse 6, and her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. That word irritate there, in the Hebrew, it's the word thunder. In other words, Peninnah wasn't subtle. She was very vocal, very loud, very verbal, very conspicuous about the fact that she has all of these children and Hannah has none. Verse 7. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Even though she's getting double portions, she's not eating. Elkanah notices, and Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? A little bit later on, verse 10, we get even more of an idea of Hannah's soul. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. Why was she upset? Well, a couple reasons. I think we could all figure it out. Number one, she's in a polygamous relationship. That never works out. All kinds of people say, well, it's in the Bible, it must be okay. Read the stories about the polygamous relationships in the Bible and tell me it's okay. They're a mess, every one of them. There is not one successful polygamous relationship in the Bible. So that's a mess, and we know that. The 2 wives are rivals for obvious reasons. But then the other reason why she's upset is because Hannah has failed to meet the cultural ideal. And the cultural ideal is if you are married, you are to be pregnant, and you are to give children. That is a cultural ideal. Now we look at that and we take a step back and say, wow, such an oppressive culture. It's too bad women were just chattel back then. And well, think about this though, because there was a practical reason why that was a cultural ideal. The more children you had, for example, the more children there would be to be able to work your business and to do your business. When children would get old enough, they would go right to work for the family field or the family farm or the family business. They didn't play games. They didn't look at videos and go to movies and play in Little League. They learned a craft and they worked for the family to make money for the family. The more kids you have, the more wealth you would have. Also, the more security you would have, because as your children get older and mom and dad get older, the children then will take care of mom and dad. If you don't have children, who's going to take care of you? And from a political standpoint and a military standpoint, it's important for a country to have lots of sons and daughters. If a neighboring nation sees that the other nation is weak because they don't have any children, well, that neighboring nation will invade and take over that country and plunder that existing nation simply because there's nobody to fight. So there are very practical reasons, cultural reasons why that ideal is there. And Hannah was not meeting up to it. And by the way, parentheses here, don't look down your nose at that culture. Because, and this might be good conversation over lunch today, every culture is oppressive. That's what culture is. Culture says, here's the norm. Culture says, here are the ideals, and you meet those. You meet those ideals, and if you don't, then the culture finds ways to reject you. Because this is about a woman, I think that women are just as much under oppression today as they ever have been before, and not by men. In our culture, there is this ideal for women. You have to be beautiful, you have to be smart, you have to be sophisticated, and if you don't measure up to any of those things, then the culture has a way of pounding you down and rejecting you. Now, we can talk about the solutions all we want for those things. My point is that as we look at this culture in 1 Samuel 1, we are not that far removed from that. Every culture is oppressive. Every culture. That's what culture is. Culture decides how you live. And if you don't measure up to it, then guess what? You're rejected by it. So that's what we see Hannah. She is absolutely and completely helpless. What I'd like you to do right now is pause. Pause and think about that problem that is in your life that keeps you awake at night. Think about that problem that is in your life, and when you wake up in the morning, it's staring you right in the face. It's in the forefront of your mind. Maybe it is staring in your face because you're married to it, but it's just a problem, and you have tried all these different solutions. You have applied all of these options, all of these things to try to solve the problem. You've tried a new job, you've tried to move, you've tried new relationships, you've tried this and that, and you've tried counseling, you've tried therapy, you've tried medication, you've tried cold turkey, you've tried everything you can, not to drink cold turkey, but getting off of the, anyway. And so you've tried all kinds of different things to get away from that, to solve the problem. You've exhausted all of your solutions, and you are so ready right now to just admit, I am helpless, I will own it. But there's still some in here, and you have options right now. And you're saying to yourself, yeah, Craig, I don't feel helpless because I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and then if those don't work, I'm going to try this. And could it be that your loving Father and mine is saying to you, you know what, you really are helpless, because helplessness is not weakness, it's humanity. It's not being weak, it's just being human. But I am going to let you go and exhaust all of those options to convince you that I am your only option. Do you think Hannah, in Hannah's case, do you think that she tried all of the popular ways to get pregnant? After she sleeps with Elkanah, she stands on her head. She drinks some herbal tea that's got so-and-so pregnant. And then maybe there's this soothsayer that you could go to. Maybe, it's a time of judges, all kinds of evil going on. Do you think maybe, just maybe, she tried all the culturally acceptable ways to conceive? Having been there for Debbie and me for 10 years, boy, howdy, we tried everything. Everything. So she's there. She's got Peninnah chirping at her. She's got Elkanah who's loving her. He's thoughtful. He's sensitive. He cares for her. And it matters nothing because all she wants is a child. She's helpless. Are you helpless? Are you willing to admit that to your own soul? Maybe not to anybody else, but in the corners of your own heart and mind, are you willing to admit that you are helpless? There is no other recourse. There is no other option. There is no other way to try to solve that. I'm helpless. If you can say that, you are on the path to greatness. You are on that path. Now, number 2. Oh, here's where it gets good. Decide to act radically. Now it's America. That's what Americans do. They act radically. We move and we do things. We're doers. And so, okay, Craig, I'll admit my helplessness if I can act radically. I'll be glad to do that. Well, let's find out what it looks like in the text itself, and we'll see some really great things, hopefully, that we can be able to take. Deciding radically. Look at the 2 voices that are speaking to Hannah in this story. We've got Peninnah, Peninnah in verse 9. I don't know if it's Peninnah or Peninnah. You decide. Verse 6. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So here is Peninnah rubbing it in. And you could hear her, right? You could hear her, oh, Hannah, I wish I had your life. You don't have to do anything. You don't have any responsibilities. You can just eat bonbons all day and watch Hebrew soap operas, and you can just enjoy life and all that kind of stuff. And I've got all of these kids to take care of. And, well, it's hard right now, but when they get older, they're going to take care of me. Who's going to take care of you, Hannah? I'm pregnant again. Who knew? I'm just a fertile myrtle. I tell you, I'm just going, and I just crank out the babies all the time. Wow, how are you doing? Oh, nothing. You can hear her. All Peninnah is doing is she is the culture saying, here's how you be happy. I'm happy, you're not. Weep away. The culture says to be happy, you have to have kids. I've got tons of them. How many do you have, Hannah? So that voice of Peninnah is speaking into her. She's hearing that voice. Then we have Elkanah, bless his heart. Verse 8, and Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Mistake number 1. And why do you not eat? Mistake number 2. And why is your heart sad? Mistake number 3. And now he's going for the home run. Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Oh, Elkanah. He's speaking to her. All Elkanah is doing here is he's telling her, this is how you be happy. You have me. Isn't that enough? Now imagine just for a moment if Hannah had responded, because there is no indication she responds back. There's no indication that she lashes out at Peninnah, but suppose that she did. What would she have said? Peninnah, I know that you are giving our husband sons and daughters. Good for you, but you better know this. He is giving me his love. So who's winning now? You're giving sons and daughters, good for you. I get his love. You don't get that. I get a double portion. There is no indication that Hannah says that at all. Now, what would she have said to Elkanah had she responded to Elkanah with, am I not worth more to you than 10 sons? No. No, you're not. You're not worth more than 1 son. I'll take a son over you anytime, bub, but I need you to have a son. But she doesn't respond. But what does she do? She acts radically. Let's look through this. Verse 9. And if we read quickly, we're going to miss it, okay? Verse 9. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. This is after Peninnah speaks to her. This is after Elkanah speaks to her. And so they eat. And then it says this. The two most important words, I think, in 1 Samuel are these. Hannah rose. Hannah rose. Now we're kind of thinking to ourselves, why does a storyteller need us to know that she rose? What's the significance of that? Well, the significance is this. That's a Hebrew expression. Imagine for a moment that you are from another culture, not American culture, and you're just learning English and you've gotten pretty good at speaking English, and many of you have experienced this if you've come in from another country. And all of a sudden, you're in this conversation with someone, and they say this, yeah, so-and-so, they let the cat out of the bag. You're kind of going, I don't see a cat, and why is it in a bag? Or so-and-so, they are off their rocker. And you're asking yourself, there's no rocker, and they're not off of it. Those are expressions. Hannah rose is a Hebrew expression meaning this. She took charge. She took control. She walked away from the cultural ideal. She made a radical action, a radical decision to walk away from all this. And so what was the radical decision? What was this radical act that she did? Verse 10. I've got to find it first. There it is. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. So what was the radical action? What was the radical action that Hannah took? She prayed. What do you do with your helplessness? Do you go out and look for other options? Probably. And then you can't find any more other options, no alternatives, you pray. I think that's one of the reasons why most of us here struggle with praying, is because most of the time we don't need to. We have options. We have decisions. We have other things that we could do other than pray. We're not helpless. But what do you do when you are helpless? You act radically. You pray. And she prays. But notice the prayer. It's kind of, I don't know, it looks like she's kind of bartering with God. She's bargaining with him. God, if you give me what I want, I'll give you what you want. Deal? I want a child, and if you give me a child, I will give him back to you. I have no other way to get a child. I've tried everything else. And so I'm helpless. I need your help. And so give me a child. And if you do, then I'll make him a good Christian, good Jewish boy. He'll go to Sabbath school. He'll be raised in a synagogue. And we'll live by the law. And we'll do all those things, God, if you give me a child. It sounds like that. But if she was bargaining with God, then what happens next wouldn't have happened. Look now at verse 12. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart. Only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. That's another indication, by the way, of how evil the times were, because even the high priest didn't recognize someone praying. A person who was devoted to prayer couldn't recognize someone who was praying because nobody ever did. So she must be drinking. She must be drunk, otherwise no one would do that, is kind of the impression. Verse 15. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Verse 19. They rose early in the morning and went and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife. They made love, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. For she said, "I have asked for him from the Lord." That's a great story, isn't it? And if we're not looking, we're going to miss it. It says in verse 18, the last part, after she told Eli what was going on, then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. She wasn't pregnant, but she was no longer sad. She ate as a sign that she was content, that she was at peace, that she was calm. You see, if Hannah had been bargaining with God, this is how it would look: prayer, pregnancy, peace. Lord, I want to be pregnant, and I'm not going to have peace unless I am pregnant. And so this is what I want. If you grant this to me, then I will have peace. If I get what I want, I will be happy. This formula right here, you're not loving God, you're using God. You don't want God, you want what he has to offer. You want this, you don't want him. But notice that was not the way that Hannah prayed. This is how it worked here: prayer, peace, pregnancy. Lord, I want a baby. And in going to the Lord and asking for this baby, God provided peace for her before. How can that happen? How can she be at peace before the answer is even given? How does that work? I mean, aren't we supposed to be happy after we get what we want? Not before? You go on a job interview, and you go to the interview, and you think you did okay, and you come home, you're on pins and needles. You're not at peace because you really want the job. And so, where does the peace? She's not getting what she wants, and yet she still has peace. That's the beauty of this. I've taken the liberty to paraphrase what I think she's praying, and I want to just break it down here a little bit. And so this is just a paraphrase that I did, okay? Lord, all my life I have wanted to have a child for my sake. That's the cultural appeal, right? The cultural ideal is to have a child for my sake. Penina's harping on me, and my husband would love me more. I'd be accepted in the community. I want to have a child for my sake. I still want a child, but I want it for your sake. If I ask for a child for me, then I wouldn't have any peace until you answered in the way I asked. If I want the child for me, then I will never be happy unless you give me a child. But Lord, she goes on, but if I ask for a child for you, then I am free to receive any response you desire to give. The whole point of this story is not godly people have kids. The point of this story, and really the point of the entire grand story, is this: godly people have God. Godly people have him. And somewhere along the way, Hannah learned that. She learned, yes, I want a baby. I want a child. But Lord, I'm finding that I want you. And so if you give me a child, that child is going to go to you. And so if you see fit to answer that and give me a child, great. If you see fit to answer that by not giving me a child, great, because I have you. That's greatness. That's freedom. She's just turned her back on the culture. She's turned her back on the culture and says, I am no longer striving to meet up to these standards and having the culture beat me down. But in my helplessness, I cry out to God, I cry out to him, and I love him. Now, once again, we look at this and say, why? How could she come to this reality? Look again at verse 11. And she vowed a vow and said, this is in her prayer, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look at the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Did you notice a repetitive word there? In her prayer, Hannah began to realize who she really is. In a country where everybody thinks that they're king, this great, incredible woman recognized who she was. Servant of the king. The servant of the King of Kings. Your servant, your servant, your servant. I serve you. God, you don't serve me. I serve you. I'm loving you. And then this promise, this strange promise, the last part of verse 11, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Well, she's just dedicating her child to the Lord. They're going to go to synagogue school and learn all these things. And you know what she's done there? It's probably the contemporary equivalent of giving your baby up for adoption. A little 2-minute history lesson. As we all know, Israel had 12 tribes. The nation was made up of 12 tribes. 11 of those tribes could own property, they could do business, they could grow their business, they can do all kinds of things. They had the freedom to do that. There was one tribe, however, that was not allowed to own property because their entire life was focused around the tabernacle. Their whole job, their whole property, their whole business was to maintain the worship system of that time, which was the tabernacle. And that was the tribe of Levi. And that's all they could do. They couldn't own property. They couldn't do business. They couldn't go across. They couldn't travel. They were locked to the tabernacle. That's all their job was. But there would be other members of other tribes who were convicted and wanted to serve the Lord as a Levite. And so they wanted to become, like, I guess you could call it a volunteer Levite. And a volunteer Levite was called a Nazirite. And they would take a vow. Samson, for example, was a Nazirite. Not a very good one, but a Nazirite. And so what Hannah is saying is that Samuel, or this baby, if you give me a baby, I'm going to give him for your sake. I'm going to give him to bless you, O God. And she was relegating him to a Nazirite life. You know what she's saying by that? What she is saying is, Lord, if you give me a child, I will forfeit the joy of being a mother. I will forfeit the joy of going to the courtyard and sitting with all the other moms and watching our children play with each other. I will forfeit the joy of having my child run to me and wrap their arms around me. I will forfeit the joy of loving this baby as my own. I give him to you. He is going to go to Shiloh, and he will live a Nazirite, and he will become a Levite, basically, and they will call him son. That's amazing to me. Lord, if you give me a son, for your sake, I will dedicate him to you. I will offer him to you, because you are my good and faithful God. I heard that ladies on Wednesday night have been going through the book of Jonah. In fact, I think you just ended this last week. And it's a video Bible study by Priscilla Shirer, who's an incredible Bible teacher. She's really good. And they were saying that one of the things that she said in the later meetings, in the later lessons in the book of Jonah is this. She's told the ladies, this is how I pray. Quotes, Lord, do this thing, but if you have something better, do that. I think that in a nutshell, that was Hannah's prayer request. Lord, give me a child, but if you have something better, do that. That's a prayer of a helpless person. Lord, I want this. Will you please give this to me, or will you please take this from me? Will you please do this? But if you have something better than what I'm asking, then do what you want to do. Your will be done with this. Folks, that is true greatness when we own our helplessness and we take radical action. And the radical action is not trying to go and find other options, but rather dropping to our knees in prayer and simply going before the Father and saying, Lord, I want this, but if you have something better, I want that. Lord, would you please do this, but if you have something better, would you please do that? Because ultimately, Lord, all I really want is you. I want you. And so will you please give me more of you? And if I have more of you, then that will make me satisfied. That will make me content. Because I cannot produce contentness on my own. Well, the third step to greatness: practice the pattern, embrace the person. I get this from Hannah's song, the one that you heard Beth read a few minutes ago. Practice the pattern, embrace the person. Well, what's the pattern? What do you mean pattern? Well, pattern is just simply a model by which we live, a model by understanding how God works. And we see this in chapter 2. Look at verses 4 and 5, for example. This is kind of towards the beginning of Hannah's song. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. Did you see the pattern there? Then jump on down. There's one more, verse 8, I think it is. Verse 8, yeah. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. Did you notice the pattern in verses 4, 5, and 8? Something great becomes small, and something small becomes great. Something full becomes empty, and something empty becomes full. Something wealthy becomes poor, and something poor becomes wealthy. There is this grand reversal, this change of pattern, where all of a sudden, and Hannah is the one saying this. She says, I was helpless, I was poor, I was lost, I was rejected, and now all of a sudden, I'm not. I'm the opposite of that. I'm the opposite of what I was. Not because God gave me what I wanted in a child, but because God gave me what I wanted in Him. And we see this pattern throughout the whole Scripture, is that God gravitates to the poor. He gravitates to the weak. He goes after the marginalized. He goes after the invisible. And He raises them up. So practice the pattern. And here's the good news. We have a person who practiced the pattern. Verse 10. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them He will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to His king and exalt the horn of His anointed. Well, this is weird because there was no king. Well, there were thousands of them, but there was no royal king. There was no king to rule, and yet Hannah is singing this song talking about a king, talking about an anointed one. And so we kind of scratch our heads, what's going on here? We know who this person is. We're not with this person. Remember back in Genesis chapter 3 we talked about last Sunday? There's this person that God is going to raise up to defeat the snake. Is this the person? Is this the one that's going to break the enemies? Is this the one that's going to have all the adversaries broken into pieces and thunder from heaven? Is this the one? Now, when Beth was up here reading the song of Hannah, did any of it sound familiar to you? I mean, I knew that she's going to read this. It happened in the first service. It happened again, just as I was listening to the words being spoken. My reflex was, is this Christmas? Is this what's going on? Is this Christmas? I'm just curious because it sounds an awful lot like Christmas is going on here. And what we have is that Mary sang a song in Luke chapter 1 after she heard that she is pregnant. And what's so amazing is that these two women, they belong to the same culture. Mary and Hannah belong to the same culture, and both of them failed to measure up to the cultural ideals. The culture says married women get pregnant. Hannah wasn't. The culture says unmarried women don't get pregnant. Mary was. And when Mary finds out from the angel that she is going to give birth to the person spoken of in Genesis 3:15, who is going to crush the head of the serpent and save the world from its sins, when she realizes that she is going to give birth to that person, she sings, and she derives much of her lyrics and the pattern of those lyrics from Hannah. Here are just some of the words that this is Mary's Magnificat in Luke chapter 1. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked on the humble estate of his servant. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. Did you see the pattern? Poor, rich. This baby that she was going to give birth to was going to reverse everything. And he did it, right? Think about Jesus' public ministry. He gravitated to the broken. He went to the weak. He went to the powerless. He went to the helpless. He would gravitate to the Hannahs in that culture. They had no recourse. The culture said this. The lepers, they couldn't measure up. The women couldn't measure up. The sick couldn't measure up. And so what is the gospel? The gospel is this: God sees that we cannot measure up. And so what did he do? Boom. He comes underneath the low. He comes underneath the weak. He comes underneath the poor, and he lifts them up. He lifts them up. And then what happens to him? This King of Kings, this Lord of Lords, this creator of the universe, he becomes low and made himself nothing, taking on the form of a man, becoming a servant, and then becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Could Jesus have gone any lower? Born in a manger, born in obscurity, born in a one-horse town of Bethlehem, living in Nazareth, and being a common laborer. That's all he was. When you looked at him, you wouldn't think, now that's a leader. But all of a sudden, this creator God changes everything around him by taking the low and lifting them up. And how does he do that? By coming down to the low and bring them up. He's betrayed, he's rejected, he's condemned to die on false charges, he's crucified. The lowest kind of death that you could have done back then. The death of a criminal, the death of a hated one. He becomes low. Jesus became helpless. Jesus willingly became powerless so that you and I could have hope and greatness. Do you see the pattern? This pattern Jesus observed. Now, I want you to pause again. Just pause. Are you in that helpless situation? Are you having a hard time admitting that? I know in our culture says if you've got options, you've got hope. Our culture says you've got to be this, or you're nobody, you're a zero. But Jesus Christ comes to us and he says, I've come underneath that. No one can go as low as I have gone to bring you up. Imagine just for a moment that Christianity was founded like all the other world religions, All the other world religions, every one of them says this: I am starting a religion, do what I do. Follow my teaching and do what I do. If Jesus had done that, if he had come to earth riding a white stallion, wielding a sword, gonna kill all of the enemies and say, if you want to follow me, do what I do, then what would have happened? The strong, the powerful, the capable, the wealthy, they would have found a way possibly to do what Jesus did and follow Jesus. But what about the broken? What about the invisible? What about the weak? What about the poor? No way. There's no way that they could follow him. And Jesus knew that, so he becomes one of them. And not just one of them, one of us. He knows what helplessness feels like. He knows what despair feels like. He knows what desertion feels like. He knows what pain feels like. And so now he is offering you the greatness of peace that only he can offer because he defeated the grave and came to life. What about you? I mean, we're going to take some time this morning and think about this. What situations keep you awake at night? And you don't even like to think about that. Are you willing to admit your hopelessness and helplessness in that situation? If you are, then you are exactly where God so desperately wants you to be. Because now all you need is him. And when all you need is him, you will find out that's all you need. And so in the time we have here, as these guys lead us in a song, just think about that. Am I helpless? And then I'm just asking right now, take a radical act of action and pray. This radical act and just pray. Lord, I'm helpless. And yes, I want that. I want this. I want this new job. I want a better marriage. I want my kids to come home. I want to have kids. Yes, I want that. But God, can I have you? That's not going to change what I want, but I want you. And so I'm not going to make any Nazirite vow. I'm not going to do it. I just want you. And if I have you, then I have what I want. And so, Lord, I want this. I want those things. Yes, I want that. But if you've got something better, then I want that. Whatever that better is, I'm trusting you. I'm not putting conditions on whether you answer this prayer, then I'll be happy. I'm going to trust you before you answer the prayer. I'm going to love you and follow you before you answer the prayer. I'm going to have peace, Lord. I'm going to walk away and I'm going to live my life. I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to love my family. I'm going to love my spouse. I'm going to trust you. I still want that. But I'm going to trust you. Because I want what you want. So if it's this, I want that too. What is that in you? What is that request for you? What is it that you want so much and you've tried everything, and so now, God, it's in your hands, and so I want to be in your hands too. However way you answer, I'm good because I have you. If you want to come forward and just pray at the steps or whatever as an act to pray, then please feel free to do that. You can stay right where you are. You can stand, you can sit, you can kneel right where you are. If you want, just go for a walk. Just go for a walk before everybody gets out there. I want to walk and I want to sort this out in my mind and my heart. Feel free to do that. Because many times when we are praying radically, it requires our body to do something. And so please feel free to have that space to do that.
Thanks for listening to the Arcade Church podcast. Visit us at arcadechurchonline.com, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.